Hello everyone. Today we are going to dive into fascinating evolution in Gen AI, which is DFIT or Diffusion Vision Transformer for image generation, or originally proposed by researchers at NVIDIA. After breaking down the core mechanics of the paper that was proposed by NVIDIA, uh, I will walk you through the specific architecture changes we did in this phase. So to understand, but before that, to understand why DFIT is significant, we first need to look at the standard approach. Like historically, the backbone of the diffusion model, like those powering that Dell or like stable diffusion, has been the unit architecture. Units are incredibly effective at denoising images step by step using convolution downsampling and upsampling. The same thing we can see in the architecture that is shown over here as well. It is also a kind of a unit architecture still. However, in the realm of standard computer vision tasks, like vision transformers have largely overtaken CNNs due to their incredibly scalability and ability to capture the global context. But the core question is in diffusion task, the core question is, can DFT paper can we completely replace the unit backbone in a diffusion model with a vision transformer and do it efficiently? The answer is yes, which is made possible by the NVIDIA team. And uh, they introduce, instead, in place of CNN, they introduced a vision transformer in denoising as well. They introduced these VIT blocks and use CNN only for downsampling and upsampling the output of the VIT model at each block. So how does DFT work? The architecture is designed to operate in either pixel space for lower resolution. For lower resolution, this latent space architecture is used, and inside them they did use the VIT architecture and TMMSA, same as we did in VIT. As we did in VIT, they use the same architecture, but they include one more thing, which is the TMSA technique, designed like for lower resolution they use this latent space firmware, and for the higher resolution they use this image space architecture. Instead of passing an image through the convolution layer, DFT treats the noisy image, or noisy latent, as a sequence of patches. It patchifies and tokenizes the input just like words in a sentence for any LLM. There are two major innovations in the baseline DFT architecture that make it so powerful. First is parameter efficiency. Parameter efficiency. DFT is parameter wise quite quite good, and DFT achieved a state of art FID score on ImageNet 256, on ImageNet 256, CIFAR and FFHQ, like using roughly 17% to 20% fewer parameters than competing transformer based diffusion models. Second, and this is the true secret source of the paper, is a concept known as noise. The thing that we implement in the we mm, develop on this model is a concept known as noise aware attention, which DFIT implements through TMSA, and we implement it through noise aware attention. And let's look closely at how this noise aware attention works in diffusion models. The time step tells the model exactly how much noise is currently corrupting the image. Traditionally, network just use simple normalization layers to inject this time step that the TMSA that they use over here. DFT reimagines this completely because the time step directly correlates to the noise level. TMSA dynamically adjusts the attention mechanism itself based on how noisy the image is by directly projecting the time token into the queries, queues, and values of the attention layer. The network becomes truly noise aware. The thing they encode TMSA, the equation in which they encode TMSA is this, and the in Q key value, the time encoding is used like this, and this is the spatial embedding, and this is the time embedding that they use. When the image is highly corrupted by noise in early generation, this noise aware attention forces the model to focus on global low frequency structures. As the noise clears in later stages, the attention dynamically adapts and shifts its focus to local high frequency details. This is this fine-grained noise-aware control is what allows DiffiT to generate such high fidelity images so efficiently. And our modification that we use, we did in the paper is, first is, we use uh, TMSA technique, uh, we introduce the noise aware attention, which we introduce the noise aware attention, uh, which actually calculate the amount of noise at that instant and use that for the further processing. And the another thing that we introduce is the activation function. The previous paper, uh, the previous paper uses the switch activation function here. The previous paper used the Swiss activation function, and in place of that we are proposing a new activation function, which is ADTX. And the graph of Swiss activation function you can see is this blue line graph. And for our ADTX that we integrate in the paper is this, for gamma equals to half and for alpha equals to 1 and beta equals to 1, we use this equation. And you can also see the structure is more or like same, but it is a bit smooth at closer to the origin, so it relatively gives better accuracy than the Swiss activation function that the DiffiT used initially. So yeah, this was all. We introduced aptx, and like by so to summarize, we started with the highly efficient unit-free DFT architecture, which relies on noise-aware, time-dependent multi-head self-attention to achieve state-of-art image quality. By implementing our custom changes and introducing the aptX module, as shown in our diagram, uh, as shown in our diagram. So we aim to retain that incredible parameter efficiency while the training efficiency. Diffusion models are like rapidly evolving, and moving to purely transformer based noise aware architecture is clearly the next frontier. We believe that the integration of module like aptx and the noise aware attention that we did use pushes the frontier just a little bit further.
Explain the code base of our DL project on the diffusion transformer proposed by NVIDIA. So this project contains some of the code base cloned by their official repository. Like, so this code basically contains the code of 4 diffusion transformers. 2 were proposed in NVIDIA, the latent DiffiT. So the DiffiT directory contains the code base for the latent DiffiT, which is the diffiT.py. So for our first experiment, I used the pre-trained latent DiffiT model provided with the paper and evaluated on the ImageNet 256. The latent DiffiT pipeline is different from the image space one. Instead of operating on 32 cross 32 pixel images, the model works in a compressed 32 cross 32 latent space, and it uses a VAE that encodes the 256 cross 256. So these are the positional embeddings to generate the time based attention. So it uses the VAE to encode the 256 cross 256 image down to 4 channels at 32 cross 32. After denoising, a VAE decoder reconstructs the full image. So it uses the same time dependent multi self-threaded attention, where the attention block gets the input of the time embeddings generated by the time step embedder and the label embedder, so that every step of training the transformer has the context of how much noise it has along with time. So we reproduce its results by downloading the pre-trained model, and it is present in the log directory. We can see the FID score of 1.73 and inception score of 275, which is very close to the values proposed in the original paper. And for our next reproducibility task, we So the repository didn't have the DiffiT image space implementation. So we implemented the DiffiT model for the image space, which directly encodes a 32x32 image of the CIFAR10 and uses a unit like structure to train it and evaluate. So the DiffiT image.py, this is the baseline model, the full unit structure architecture with TMSA and Silio activation. So the DiffiT image, so the first thing that happens is the time embedding, and when the model receives a noisy image, it also receives the noise level sigma. We convert sigma into a sinusoidal embeddings by using this sinusoidal time step function, and same idea as positional encoding in transformers, and then it passes through a small two-layer MLP. This gives us what we call a time token. So the DiffiT res block is the core building block. It does two things. First, a conv branch, group norm, and then silo activation. So the DiffiT res block. This is the class implementation for the DiffiT res block. And inside the transformer block is where the TMSA lives. Let me show you. So the TMSA computes queries, keys and values from both the spatial tokens, the image features and the time token. So the query is x spatial times WQS plus x times WQT. Same for queries, keys and values. This means the attention weights depend on what denoising step we are at. So after all this code, we wrap everything in the EDM precondition class implemented at the last. This is the preconditioning from the EDM paper by Karras et al. It normalizes the inputs and outputs so that network sees well-conditioned targets at every noise level. So to reproduce the result on the CIFAR10, there was no pre-trained model, so we implemented a train.py, which basically uses the information from the paper. Like, so the training loop is pretty standard. It is, we use the Adam with learning rate 10 to the minus 3 and batch size of 512 matching the paper, and we also maintain an exponential moving average of the model weights with decay of 0.999. When we generate samples or evaluate, we always use the EMA model, not the raw training weights. This gives us much smoother, higher quality results. We checkpoint every 1000 K images and generate sample grid every 500 K images, so we can visually track the progress. I launched training using train.cifar10.sh, which sets all the hyperparameters required for training. Due to time constraints, I trained for only 10,700 steps instead of the paper's 200,000, but the loss curve was healthy around 0.178 and the model was clearly learning. So after implementing the baselines, we implemented the DiffiT model using noise aware attention on the image space. So rather than taking the time, so this is the most novel part of the work. I replaced TMSA with what I'm calling noise aware attention, or NAA. The motivation is this: that TMSA conditions attention on the time embedding, which is an indirect representation of sigma. So the model has to learn through training that high sigma means broad attention and low sigma means sharp attention. I wanted to make that inductive bias explicit. So here's how the NNA works. I added the noise level MLP. So this is the noise level MLP class that takes raw sigma directly as input. It outputs two things: a gate G of sigma, which is a scalar between 0 and 1 produced by a sigmoid, and a per head bias B of sigma, which is the vector with one value per attention head. Then in the attention computation, I modified the logits like this. Instead of dividing qk transpose by the square root of d, I divide by the qk root of d times 1 plus the gate, and I add the per head bias to the logits before the softmax. At high sigma, early denoising, the gate approaches 1, so we are dividing by roughly 2, which flattens the softmax distribution and makes attention broad and global. At low sigma fine detail stage, the gate approaches 0, so we divide by roughly 1, giving a peak softmax and sharp local attention. So crucially, the time embedding is still there. It still modulates QK with the same way as TMSA. NA and TMSA are complementary. The time embedding controls what features the model looks at. NA controls how broadly it looks at. So after implementing the noise aware attention, we can run it using the same sample.py and evaluator.py that I will discuss later. The DiffiT image aptX contains the implementation of replacing the Sileo activation function with the aptX activation function. So the fourth modification was replacing Sileo, also known as the switch. aptX is defined as alpha plus tan h of beta x times gamma x. At the default parameters, alpha equals 1 and beta equals 1, gamma equals half. This simplifies to 1 plus tan x times 2. So it behaves similar to the mesh but requires fewer floating point operations. So this file contains implementation. To evaluate all this, we need to run the sample.py that generates the sample images of the trained models. So we generate 50,000 sample images to compare against the standard 50,000 images of the required dataset, and we use the evaluator.py to convert both of these samples into vector forms using the OpenAI's Inception v3 module, and calculate the FID score and the inception score and everything. So evaluator.py gives you the results on the corresponding models. Thank you.